So field services officers are the first responders for animal welfare in every single community. In order to rise above the neighborhood dog catcher stigma, which we all know we don't like, a new approach is rooted in not just public and pet safety, but also in community advocacy is required. I'm excited to introduce Josh Fisher, Dr. Josh Fisher, Animal Services Director for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, and also the President of the National Animal Control Association, and also Annette Ramirez, who runs probably the largest field services in the United States. She is the Assistant General Manager of the Los Angeles Animal Services on today's. Those are the panelists for today's webinar. And before we get started, Josh and Annette, you go first, please. Just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your role and what connects you to field services.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. I'm so happy to be here today with everyone. So I'm Annette Ramirez with LA City Animal Services, and I've been with the Department of Animal Services for 24 years. And about 16 years of my career has actually been as either an animal control officer or as a lieutenant. And I was part of the founding members of our Animal Cruelty Task Force, which was a joint venture with the LAPD and the prosecutor's office. So over my 24 years of experience, I've seen quite a huge change as to what the animal control officer's role is and what the community's expectations of them are.
And Josh?
Sure. So I'm Josh Fisher. I am the Director of Animal Services here for the City of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County in North Carolina, which we are part of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. So we roll up to the Chief of Police. I also serve as the current board president for the National Animal Care and Control Association. And my background coming into this, I've been here in Charlotte for about 10 years now. But prior to that, I worked in another municipality here in North Carolina, overseeing animal services. And in both of those organizations, we were responsible for animal control. I have never been an animal control officer, but I have overseen lots of animal control officers and have spent a lot of my career really focusing on how we can better leverage our field services units to impact our communities.
All right. So one could say with you, Josh, that you may be an expert in when it's raining cats and dogs.
Yes. Just yes.
So let's get started in a conversation about just about the field services in general, which is so unique in each community. Can you both describe your cities, the size, what the typical some of the typical support needs, and how your field services programs fit into it? And we can start with you, Josh.
Sure. So I will tell you with zero hesitation that our animal control officers are truly the front line for our agencies. They are the ones that are out in the communities. Our officers are the ones that community members recognize. They're the ones that community members are willing to have conversations with and express what they truly need, right? I think for a lot of years, our industry has been really good at thinking we know what our communities need rather than actually listening to what they're telling us they need. And part of that transition has been, candidly, as leadership, listening to our officers, right? You know, our officers being out there running these calls for services, developing the relationships with the community members has been what has helped us to truly make that transition. You know, we've talked a lot over the last several years in particular about how do we bring our field services units along. And I would challenge that to say that so many of our field services units have actually been there longer than we have. It's just all starting to, read from the same page, if you will, so that we make sure we're speaking the same language. Because they have, if you talk to your officers that are out there running calls for service, many of them have been doing these proactive approaches to animal control work for many, many years without anything formal being tied to it, right? We've had officers that are providing these community support focused initiatives on their own, right? A lot of times, with money out of their own pockets. And so now, we in these leadership roles are like, oh yeah, we're going to do, this proactive thing, and we're going to go, and they're looking at us like, we've been doing that, but thanks. We appreciate the support now. But the reality is, our officers are the ones that are out in the communities developing these relationships. And, in order to be successful in what we're doing, right? Part of what we have to acknowledge is that these are community problems that require community solutions. We are not the end all be all of animals, right? We cannot possibly fix all these problems ourselves. It's going to take a village, quite literally, to fix it. And that starts with, really leaning heavily on the people that are out there and have the relationships with the villagers.
And Annette, do you remember the question?
I believe I do. So yeah, with LA, we're a city of about 4 million residents. So it's a really huge beast. And we are a sanctuary city. We're a bit of a melting pot. So we see people from all different beliefs, and those beliefs don't always align with what our beliefs are. And it takes our animal control officers to be able to educate people and really explain to people um, how to properly care for animals. But like Dr. Fisher said, they are the first line of contact that most people in the community ever have with animal services. It is through our animal control officers. So our animal control officers need to be savvy. They need to be able to think on their feet. They need to be able to be fluid with the different situations, because no two situations are the same. And I totally agree with what Dr. Fisher said too about our animal control officers out there doing the work, and then leadership comes in, a year behind them saying, we're going to do this. And they're already doing it because they've had to adapt to what the conditions are out in the field. And us as leaders are sometimes behind the eight game on them with being able to provide them the support and the resources that they need in order to be successful. So I think it is very important that we have those conversations with our field officers as to what situations they're dealing with while they're out in the community. I know when I was an animal control officer, I dealt with pet owners that were experiencing homelessness 2 to 3 times a month. Now it's almost 2 to 3 times a day that we're interacting with people, pet owners that are experiencing homelessness, that absolutely love their pets. They just need help and resources to be able to keep that family unit together. So, we're as an agency trying to provide our officers with the support that they need to be able to provide support out to the community members, whether that's through our pet food pantry or making sure that we can purchase dog houses for people who don't have dog houses and don't have the funding to do it, rather than our animal control officers seizing that dog because it doesn't have a dog house. Let's buy them $100 dog house. It beats having that animal come into the shelter in what we have already overcrowded situation. So being able to provide that support to our animal control officers and being able to listen to them as to what their needs are so that we can provide them the support that they need is crucial to them being successful out in the field.
That's awesome. And I'm going to go a little bit off script because I want to ask you, how do you all, the two of you, listen to your officers? Because what you said is so important. The officers are making decisions in real time that are effective, but may not be part of a program or a system that's already in place because it's a new situation. But is there a way for agencies to be more interactive in terms of listening to their officers and getting that information from their officers to know what the what you know, some of the things that they could be implementing that they don't already?
Yeah, so what we try to do here in LA is have regular meetings. I typically meet with the lieutenants on a regular basis to get feedback from them as to what issues that they're addressing out in the field. And it also helps them to be able to hear each other and provide recommendations to each other as well, because someone may have already addressed that situation out in the field in their district. And to kind of explain that a little bit further is here in LA City, we actually have 6 different shelters that operate throughout different parts of the city. So we're a pretty huge beast. So we have lieutenants at each of our different shelters, and each of those field services can sometimes work as a silo where they don't know what each other are doing. So having those meetings where the supervisors can talk about what issues they're addressing and how they're addressing those issues is really helpful. And then I do maintain an office at one of the shelters, and I have an open door policy. I'm here Monday through Friday, and any officer, any employee that wants to come in and have a conversation with me, my door is always open. So making myself available to them, I think, is really important as well.
Yeah, and I'll echo the open door policy. I'm fairly confident that I should just have my mail forwarded to the shelter because I'm pretty sure I've taken up residence here at this point. But for us, I think the reality is, me as the director, right? I feel like I'm somewhat removed from a lot of the day-to-day work. And so I rely very heavily on, our field operations manager. And then I know he relies very heavily on our field supervisors. Our supervisors have roll call with their officers every single day, and they're listening to the officers as far as what, cases they're working. They're constantly on the phone with officers because I walk through the building and I don't think I ever see any of our field supervisors without their cell phone, to their ear or text messaging, right? And so they're in very active communication with the officers that are out in the field. So they really do have their thumb on what's going on. And so I feel like my role is to listen to them, to listen to their manager when they're bringing things, to me, because they're the ones doing the work, right? The reality is, they are the ones doing it. So they're communicating every single day, multiple times a day with their officers, and then the supervisors are communicating actively with their leadership. So it's really just making sure that when stuff is brought forward, that we're having the conversation, right?
So Josh, your agency reports to the police department. Could you talk a little bit with to the group about give us some things you can share about how those dynamics work, and any tips and tricks in fostering a stronger relationship, and how you navigate some of the internal politics?
Well, anyone who's met me knows that I don't politic well. um, the reality is, for me at least, I acknowledge, and I am very, very fortunate. I have excellent relationship with our chief of police, and am very fortunate that there is a lot of mutual respect there. I also maintain that I was hired to do a job, not to be a pretty face, and not to give them the answers that they want. Right? I'm here to give them what is actually happening. But with that, I think the main thing is really just making sure that, again, those lines of communication are open. There is it's a mixed bag working for police, candidly. And I think that, the reality is when you've got a police department that is, in a major metropolitan city with, 2,600 officers running calls for service, dealing with homicide and violent crime, their animal services is not necessarily hitting super high on their radar every day. So you've got to make sure that when you need something, you are the squeaky wheel to a certain extent, right? And as long as you have that, open conversation and aren't afraid to be the squeaky wheel, right? You have to develop and build that, level of mutual respect that when you do say, hey, we need, they listen. And, part of that is ensuring that you're not asking for things that you don't truly need, right? But part of it is, bringing attention to what you actually do in animal services. If you talk to sworn police leadership, right, who has never really been involved in animal services, they don't know. They don't know all of the different aspects. So, we had one of our deputy chiefs of police come, and she spent an entire day, an 8-hour shift, working in the shelter. And we told her ahead of time, we're like, put on your running shoes when you come. Because she was going to be shadowing one of our management team, our shelter manager, who, I kid you not, the woman does 3.5 miles around the shelter before lunchtime every day, with zero doubt in my mind. And, we've created that environment in which, this sworn deputy chief of police came out and worked in the shelter for an 8-hour day, and, kind of wrap their head around what we do. The other piece that I think, one of the pieces that can't be discounted from a field services perspective, is the relationship with your dispatchers, right? I listen to any and all of our animal control officers, and they can all talk about who their dispatchers are. They know them by name. They have that relationship that they have developed with them, because, they're going to be able to help them out, right? They're going to be able to get them the extra help when they need it. They're going to be able to reroute a, patrol officer to their location if they need that help. They're also going to be able to help them, manage their call load, right? If we've got 8 officers in the field and 56 calls holding, they're leaning heavily on that dispatcher to help prioritize those calls. Like, yes, there's a supervisor who's helping to do that to some extent as well. But it is really embracing the fact that we are all on the same team, right? And that's something that I will say our police department does a good job of, but I would go so far to say that our city does a good job of that as well, is, really acknowledging that this is Team Charlotte, right? We're here to all try to accomplish the same mission, and we may get very frustrated with each other at times. There have been times where I have said things to the chief of police and then had to remind myself that man has a gun on his hip. So, rein it in a little bit. But, at the end of the day, it's really just recognizing that we're all here for the good of the pets and people within our community.
Thank you, Josh. And I'm going to keep my camera off for a few minutes, just until my internet becomes a little bit more stable, but I am definitely here and present. So Annette, we know that, LA Animal Services, we know that's the big kahuna. That is the largest agency in the United States. And tell us, what challenges have you seen in the city for ACOs, that you've seen your ACOs overcome?
Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest challenge that our ACOs have had to deal with is a growing city. Our population has expanded here in LA City, but yet our workforce has not. So our officers still have to get the jobs done, and the public's expectation of what an animal control officer does has changed drastically as well. They're expected to provide services and not just, like back in the day, we used to call it hook and book. You just ran in, you grabbed the animal and you took off. Now they take the time to actually have conversations with people. It's not just picking up the stray dog and bringing it into the shelter, but it's talking to the community. Like, do you recognize this dog? Do you know who it belongs to? Have you seen it in your block before? And I think one of the biggest things that our officers have really done, and what we have done as an agency to provide support to our officers, is to make partnerships with non-government organizations, because there's a lot of non-governmental organizations out there that complement the services that we can't provide. For example, we don't even do spay neuter here at the shelters for the community. we contract out with private veterinarians to provide that service. But as an organization, we provide vouchers to community members to get that service done either for free or at a discounted cost. Our officers carry a machine out in the field that can print out the voucher that's specifically for the animal and its owner, that they can use that same day at a veterinary clinic to get their pet sterilized. So another thing that we have is we have a partnership with an organization that provides free behavioral training for any resident within the city of Los Angeles to help them keep their pet if they're considering turning it in because they're having, behavioral issues or something that they need help with training. And that's a great partnership with a non-governmental organization. We partnership with veterinary clinics that do low-cost vaccine clinics, because a lot of people can't afford to pay the office visit for having their pet taken to a veterinary clinic. And we are contractors that actually do the vaccine clinics do them mobile. So they go out into the communities where they see our intake being the highest. So we identify the zip codes where we see the need because most of the animals are coming from, and they go to those zip codes and they provide the veterinary services right there in the community. So being able to provide our officers with that support of these are the organizations. You don't have to just give a person a ticket because they don't have a license. Here, give them this information about a vaccine clinic that's in their neighborhood next week, and then give them a voucher to get their pet sterilized so that they qualify for a $20 license versus paying a higher fee for a more expensive intact dog license. So we've really worked with non-government organizations to provide complementary services that we're not able to provide, which provides the support to the animal control officers out in the field to be able to help educate people and help provide people with the resources that they need to be more responsible pet owners.
You said something that triggered me there, in a good way, Annette, and you talked about complementary services. And this is a little bit off script as well, but could the two of you talk a little bit about the role that you see field services, your organization, and the idea that we don't always have to own the we don't have to own the program ourselves if we are partnering and providing those complementary services.
Sure. So I'll jump in. From my perspective, I think that's part of what strategic planning is, right? It's recognizing what resources are available in your community and who is doing what and doing it well, right? We have, as an industry, had this almost savior complex in a lot of ways and felt like we have to be all things to all people, right? And the reality is that we can't. There are agencies and organizations that are not animal welfare, right? They may be something, they may be housing, they may be a food bank, right? But they have pieces of what we need to help make, people in our community successful in the situation that they're in, right? And the reality is, we need to leverage people who are doing these things and doing them well, and that will allow us to increase our bandwidth to do what we do and what we do well, right? So it's really bringing as many of these different organizations and as many of these different parties, if you will, to the table to have that conversation and decide, who's doing what, who's got the resources to focus on that and do it right, so that then that's going to increase the bandwidth of all these other people at the table to do their piece of the pie. Like I said earlier, these are community problems that are going to take community solutions. And, we are not the community to ourselves, right? We're a piece of it.
Yeah, and another program actually that we've kind of implemented with our animal control officers is volunteer support for specific situations. So for example, when we have California, we have wildfires. When we have evacuations, it's unrealistic to expect our animal control officers to be able to evacuate complete neighborhoods. So we partner with volunteers that are trained to help us do, for example, equine evacuations, that are professional equine haulers, that have the horse trailers to be able to go into these neighborhoods. They have the training, they've worked with us, they've worked with fire, they've worked with PD, and they know what to do in order to keep themselves safe as well as everyone around them. So our animal control officers aren't worried about trying to keep these volunteers safe because they know exactly what they're doing. And that has been really helpful for our animal control officers when we're dealing with the wildfire season.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Annette, just about how your services react when it comes to a disaster situation, because there's so much that we can learn from and bring into our day-to-day operations that we use during those really critical times as well. So we want to talk a little bit about the future of animal control, and we know that or field services, the future of field services. Uh, Tell us, what do you all see as the number one hurdle that you think we need to solve, and how does animal welfare industry begin to do so? And we can start with you, Annette, this time.
Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest hurdles is breaking that stigma of being dog catchers. It's one of those things that's been there for over a century, and our animal control officers are so much more. They don't want the community's animals. They don't want to take people's pets away from them. They know we don't need them at the shelters. Our shelters are all over capacity. And trying to it, and our animal control officers actually do a really great job at being empathetic towards the people that they're interacting with and providing so much more services to them than just taking the animals and leaving the location. So, but I do think that's still a hurdle that we have within the community to break that stigma of what our animal control officers are. And that they really are problem solvers and that they're there because they care. No one, I think, gets into animal welfare because they don't care about animal welfare. They're there because they really do care about the animals and the community that they're servicing, because that is the whole reason that they're there. They're there to help a community member with their pet and to hopefully create a better home for the pet, for every single pet that they interact with. It's like that starfish saying, so every single animal that they interact with, they want to just make that animal's life better and make that community member's life better, because people consider their pets family. We recognize that when animals, like someone is unable to provide care for their pet, unable to get it veterinary care, they suffer, and it's something that we can absolutely help people with helping keep their pets healthy.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
Josh.
I will go back to what Annette said about LA, in that the municipality has grown, right? But our people capital, as far as within our organizations, hasn't. And so I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is, giving our officers the time, right? Giving them the resources, primarily being time, to accomplish, what we're asking them to accomplish. The hook and book, as Annette termed it earlier, it was a reality, right? And we have all of these calls for service that, we're expected to get to, but the way in which we really need to be approaching this community service that we're providing is much more conversational, right? And that's going to take more time than the hook and book. So, in order to really provide the level of service that we need to our communities, we've got to create that bandwidth to do so. And so it is finding ways to have some calls for service that are coming into us addressed in manners that don't require officer response, right? If you think about the calls that come into, animal services from in any municipality, right? The reality is there's a good percentage of them that can be addressed either over the phone by maybe a light duty officer who could just call and talk to a community member, right? By a supervisor who is on duty and can, pick up the phone and talk to somebody. And that's going to save your officers who are actually physically going to these locations that's going to save them the time to really give them the space to spend the time where they need to and appropriately address these calls. And I think that's, part of what we really need to be looking towards is how do we make space for our officers to do this work rather than, have them 56 calls deep with, 8 officers on the road.
And to piggyback on that, I have a follow-up question for both of you. What tools do you feel like the organization as a whole can provide field services staff to be successful in the field and outside of the field, or if that makes sense, in the field and out of field?
Cool. So first, I think that we need to talk to the officers and find out what they think they need, right? But I think that, for a lot of, at least, my experience, it is making sure that the, officers have the latitude to make some of these calls themselves, right? Like they don't need to run every single thing, give a doghouse, fix a fence, that not all of that needs to be run up the chain to the powers that be, right? They need to be given the tools that they need and the autonomy that they need to make some of these calls while they're out there doing the work.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Fisher. There's definitely a lot to be said for giving the officers discretion on how to get from A to Z, because there's a million ways of making that combination in between. And every officer is going to have their different style of talking to people and approaching situations. And giving them that discretion, I think, is really important. The other thing I think is giving them time. We oftentimes overload them with the number of investigations or calls that they have to do. And being able to, like Dr. Fisher also said, is like filter their calls and make a determination as to like what can be handled with a phone call versus what needs an animal control officer to actually be present at, so that the officers can reserve their time to actually have conversations with people. So they don't feel like they're rushed, that they have to hurry up at this location because they've got 10 calls in the hopper that are waiting to be responded to, but giving them the opportunity to take their time to interact with the person, see what the root issue is, and provide resources. And we really like to look at it from like a One Health model of not just providing services to the animal, but to the family as well, because typically if the person's struggling with their pet, they're struggling with other aspects within their household as well. And if we can provide them connections with human food banks, or a social worker that can help them, that's gold as well.
I love the way officer discretion has been redefined, because you remember, Annette, back in the day, it was like our discretion was, should I give you 10 citations or should I give you 20? Right. I mean, and the just the reality, and I go back to one of my phrases that I use often, which is we play with the toys the gods give us. And the fact that the gods have now, and leadership has now been open to providing officers with tools to problem solve in the community has just been, I mean, it's been one of the great things I've witnessed in our profession. So moving forward, give us an idea, both of you, give us a little bit of an idea of what you think, you know, about the 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 difference between engagement and enforcement. Can they work hand in hand? Why and why not? I know we have this, debate as to whether or not should we enforce everything or should we just not enforce anything? Should we be all engagement or not engagement at all? Talk a little bit about how the two how, if you see the two working hand in hand, and why not? And we can start with you, Annette.
Yeah, I definitely see engagement and enforcement working hand in hand. Like one of the things I had mentioned earlier is when we're doing license enforcement of I may walk away giving you a citation, but I'm also going to give you information on the vaccine clinic as well as our spay neuter voucher. So I'm giving you the tools to be able to come into compliance. And as long as you come into compliance, this ticket will go away. But if you don't come into compliance, well, then you're going to have a fine to pay. So I definitely think that they can go hand in hand, and they should. We shouldn't only be doing enforcement or only be doing engagement. We need to make sure that, we are getting compliance because it makes a healthier pet, it makes a healthier community. That is our role to make sure that we are enforcing the laws and keeping the community, it's public safety, keeping the community safe. So but providing people with the resources to come into compliance and being lenient, and that as long as they do come into compliance, the citation will go away, because that is the ultimate goal. It's not to punish, it's to make sure that we're gaining compliance.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that, at the end of the day, our goal is to set our community up for success, right? And the fundamental reason why we exist is public health and public safety. And our community is going to be healthier and safer if we can help them become compliant. Because at the end of the day, we can go seize every single loose dog in the community and impound it for any number of reasons, right? They're going to go get more, and then we're going to have more loose dogs because we didn't address the problem, right? So at the end of the day, and that's a super simplified example, right? Like that is super, super simplified. But in reality, that's what we're facing. If we can help the community come into compliance, if we can help them get where they need to be successful, because let's be very honest, none of us want these pets in our shelters. We don't want them to come in here. And it's way cheaper 9 times out of 10 to help them stay where the heck they are. I mean, you've had this dog for 7 years and I've not heard word one from you. Now I'm going to bring it in here. No, let's find a way to keep it out there for another 7. Like this, let's have this be a you problem for 7 more years. And I don't want to hear word 2. So, the reality is just truly, from my perspective, it is setting the community up for success. That's what it boils down to.
And the two of you talk to us, and this is our last question before we take our audience questions. So audience, please hang on. We're getting to your question. Talk to us a little bit about, how do you think, what do you do to help your local government, your local officials become more supportive of field services? And we'll start with you, Josh.
So step one, in my opinion, is invite them in, right? Most of our elected officials have never worked in animal welfare. Many of them have never worked in government before, right? They are private sector community members, just like, you and me, if this was not what we chose to do for a living. And, bringing awareness, because candidly, this is a nuanced profession, right? Like this isn't something that, you grow up being significantly exposed to. If you think about your, personal life, take your total career out of the picture, right? And think about your parents who may not work in, this industry at all, if, you're anything like me. And I don't think my parents would know where their shelter was, right? Like, I don't think they would. And they have a child that does this for a living. I don't think that they probably have ever spoken to an animal control officer, because the reality is most of our community doesn't. We operate and we speak with a small subsection of our community. And if you have ever heard Mike Wheeler from Cabot, Arkansas, give a presentation, he will be the first person to tell you that as animal control, we talk to roughly 3% of our population. And why the heck aren't we going and saying thank you to that other 97% for doing what they're supposed to be doing when it comes to what we do, right? So it's bringing attention to it. It's having the conversation with, our elected officials and our city leadership. Because at the end of the day, they don't really know what this is. And, most of them, it has actually happened to me being part of the police department. There used to be a police captain that they had assigned out to animal care and control. And they put a new captain, because, anytime promotions happen, they put a new captain out here. And he was driving to come to work, right, at the animal shelter, which is where his job was. Well, he drove over to the Humane Society. And he walked in, he was like, "Hi, this is where I work now." And they were like, "No?" So, if you've got people who work that closely within your local government who don't even know where you are, your electeds don't either. So, start by having the conversation, invite them in.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Fisher, and it's taking the time to educate them about what it is that your role is in the community and what you're able and capable of doing. Most animal control agencies are set up for public safety and have like a city charter or a municipal code that they're enforcing. And oftentimes our elected officials are absolutely unfamiliar with what it is that we can and cannot do. So it's not just blanketly saying yes to everything that they request, but educating them as to what you do and why it is that you do what you do. Just before coming on to this webinar, I had someone reach out to me from one of our council offices asking us to relocate a family of skunks. That's not something we do. Skunks are rabies vector animals. You don't just move them from one portion of a city to another. So it's taking the time to educate them. I understand this is what we can do. This is what our recommendations are, and taking the time to educate them, not just saying, no, we don't do that, reach out to a pest control company or, but explaining to them why and what other options are. But our elected officials really don't know what it is that we do because they don't deal with animal control issues unless a constituent reaches out to them. And typically the constituents don't reach out unless they're unhappy with the services that they're receiving or the answer that they got. So it is really important to take the time to educate them and explain to them what we can and cannot do.
Man, you hit on something so key, Annette, because if the only time that elected officials are learning about us is when when it's some unhappy customer, then they're learning the unhappy side of our work. And we should be, working with them on we should be really informing them on the happy side of our work, or at least the proactive side of our work. All right, we got rapid fire here questions. And I'm gonna hit you all with them, and um let's yeah, well, I'll hit you with them. Okay, so an anonymous attendee says that they get a lot of pushback from officers when they try to introduce progressive concepts. Um, they encounter many that want to function as if it were many decades ago. And are there any suggestions on how to best introduce the Haas concepts?
Go
We
ahead,
both
Annette.
unmuted at the same time. So, I think really it is finding those unofficial leaders within your staff, those officers that everyone looks to that have the ear of their peers, and having those conversations with those people, identify who they are and get them to understand where you as an agency are trying to go, so that they can actually be an influence upon their peers, because it doesn't always help hearing it from management or leadership, but being able to hear it from your peers is, I think, extremely helpful. And NACA is also actually a very helpful with a lot of these progressive movements. They've made position statements that is the National Animal Control Association. I mean, this is where our animal control officers should be looking towards for getting recommendations on the direction of animal services. So utilize your staff to influence their peers and utilize NACA as well.
What she said.
Okay, next is what type of annual training should ACOs be receiving? You know, there's some of the typical ones like EBI, chemical capture, but also DEI work. Do you recommend social work, also animal handling, and also any type of community engagement activities?
Yes, all of that. I think that, some of the big things that we overlook with a lot of our field operations are things like customer experience. The reality is we are providing customer service every time an officer goes out. And there are, ways of doing this work that are going to garner more buy-in from our community. And a lot of times that's just really having the tools in your tool belt to have the conversation with people in such a way that they're going to hear it, right? So finding ways to teach our officers to do that is huge.
Yeah, totally agree with Dr. Fishers. You want to be able to provide training in all the different aspects from DEI to recent upgrades or updates in laws, animal handling, chemical capture, everything. It's all important for them to stay in tune with what is going on in their field. And as an agency, being able to support them with getting that continued education is really important.
Thank you. And yes, and you are right. Christina Justice Clearinghouse is monumental. I did a lot of work with them when I worked for HSUS, and HSUS does a great job of officers as well. And NACA is definitely leading the way. So have you all considered training some or all of your dispatchers in animal welfare services? And I'm not really sure what specifically he means by animal welfare services and training for the dispatchers. Um, but this is from Bob Tubbs. They may be able to help resolve some calls. Okay, with that training. Also, do you track trends on these calls, like what categories might there be?
So I can share, yes, we do. So in Charlotte, we're actually dispatched by 311, 911, and non-emergency policing services. So we do not have internal dispatch. So we do a lot of training with the supervision of each of those groups, and we provide keywords and we update those keywords, and we do a lot of coaching when we get a complaint and have to pull a call recording and then have conversation with dispatchers about, hey, here's how you could have done that differently, right? And then anytime you have 311, 911 dispatchers, you're tracking everything. So if you are going through like a centralized dispatch, you are tracking everything. And I would honestly, just from a data perspective, there's no such thing as tracking too much, because you can always filter it down, right? So from call completion to how many times do you pick up the call before they hang up kind of thing, and then going into like your categories, right? How many bite calls are they taking? How many of the bite calls are they able to resolve because they're able to simply explain it didn't break the skin, so it's not actually a bite, right? It could be as simple as that. And if you've got a dispatcher that's like, well, but did it break the skin? Oh, well, no, it's just a bruise. Well, then it's not a bite, right? Now, be very careful because now we're talking about public health. So, all of those pieces. But the reality is, I think that the more time that you can spend digging into the types of calls your dispatchers are getting and really looking at, what are they equipped to just answer, the better, because some of that is going to be nuanced to your community. But, overarchingly, I think really it's just digging into what are the calls and what are the questions that they're getting.
Yeah, and with us, we don't necessarily have a centralized dispatch. We do have 311 that takes a lot of our calls, and they have scripts that they follow. And if they're not able to resolve or able, there's very specific calls that they can actually enter into our system. And if they're not able to resolve or enter that call into our system, they transfer the call over to animal services for us who are, the experts to be able to work with that community member to make a determination as to the appropriate action to take with that call. But we definitely, we are able to track the types of calls that are taken, how long our officers' response time is, and what actions were taken to resolve the calls. And yeah, the more data that you can collect, the better.
So we're going to be a little bit over probably on time, but please you all stay because we want you also to fill out a survey. But so one anonymous attendee asked, I understand and appreciate helping those who need help. However, many are just extreme neglect and many are cruelty. But officers will tell them to stop, but give no citation, nor do they seize the animal. This is very frustrating for those of us who care. How do you suggest we deal with this?
So I'll take that one to start. I think having a conversation with your officers is to understand what was going on and how they're addressing the issue. I think oftentimes members of the public don't understand the state laws or seizure laws, what allows an officer to actually take someone's property. We can't normally go into someone's, yard and just take their pet away from them. We have to have exigent circumstances in order to do so. Here in LA, we don't cite people for humane violations. We can seize, post-seize, pre-seize, or we let them know that they need to correct violations by a certain date, and then we come back and ensure that those violations are corrected. So you may want to also understand what the laws are within your city and your state that rule how an animal control officer can handle specific like humane violation complaints.
I completely agree with what Annette said. I think that kind of captures all of that.
And I think there's a misnomer that people we have it's too pervasive that people believe that pet owners don't care when a lot of times we're talking about people who are living in some type of resource desert, may have some financial issue themselves, may have a social service or a human service issue. And so, our goal with Haas is to have all of those different agencies work together for the betterment of the family and the betterment of the community. All right, one last question from Ed Bolks. What strategies and tools do you believe are most effective in improving community engagement and education about responsible pet ownership and animal welfare?
So I think it's going out to the community and meeting them where they're at. Um, you know, it, interacting with community members, um, whether that be through schools, the children actually take a lot of education home to their parents, about different services that the animal control agencies offer. But churches, but going out into the community and being present within where they're at, not expecting people to come to you to always figure out what's going on, because when they come to you, it's because there's already a problem. But trying to go out to them before there's a problem and trying to do that outreach. We've been actually looking at doing PSAs, doing billboards. We do local radio stations. So it's reaching out to the community where they're at to get your messages across, to get information out about the different resources or events that your shelter are having. We work with the different high schools. We have them adopt dogs that we take to football games so that the community can see a local animal that's at their local shelter, and come talk to us at a booth where we have information about all the different services that the shelter offers. So you have to actually go out into the community. Don't expect them to always come to you, because by the time they're coming to you, it's a little bit too late.
Something like that. So,
100%. We've got to meet them where they are.
well, thank you all for being at tonight's webinar. Thank you, my two guests that were just fantastic, as you all are reading in the chat already. Just an incredible panel. If you didn't get your question answered, which it looks like we got to everybody's question, but if you have any questions about today's webinar, just email us at haas-project@americanpetsalive.org, and then